Hi everyone, I'm Joanna Penn from thecreativepenn.com and today I'm here with Dan Blank. Hi Dan.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
Hello and hello again. We've had you on the video show before, but you're also on the audio podcast, which is exciting. Now, as an introduction, Dan is a professional speaker and consultant to the publishing industry. He also teaches authors how to grow their platform and target readers through his online articles, courses, and his conference, which is very exciting. So, Dan, start off by telling us a bit more about you and your publishing background and what you do these days.
Sure. So, as an individual growing up, I was an artist, I was a musician, I was a writer, I was a poet, I was all these things. As I went through my career, I found myself always more and more getting on the publishing side. So I started off at a large trade publisher, and then I worked closely with Publishers Weekly and the Library Journal. And as everything started happening in maybe '05, 2010, with all the changes with ebooks and digital media and social media, I found it so much more possible to be working directly with the source, which is writers. With all the changes happening in publishing and people, a lot of my friends talk about all this stuff. For me, it's like, well, the one constant is going to be writers and readers. And I was able to sort of start working more and more directly with writers, and that has sort of allowed me to develop everything I've done the last several years. And I've worked with a lot of large publishers, a lot of small publishers, literary agencies, spoken at a lot of conferences, but mostly I work with dozens and dozens of authors every single month.
Absolutely. Well, then I've got to just ask you a sort of general question, because if authors are the source and readers are the destination, and you work with a lot of people in the middle, do you ever see a point where there's no middleman, or what do you see as the maturation of the ecosystem, and what can those people in the middle, agents, publishers, offer, to go in the middle?
There's always, for a certain type of person, there's the option for never having a middleman, and some people want that option. I think for most people, it's a horrible life to not have someone in the middle there, to not have a partner in it. I know that John Green, the YA author, is very vocal about talking about, he's traditionally published, about the value of his editor, of his wife, of his friends, of his agent, of all the people in the process, how, I had a good idea, but if we published that, no one would have read it. And just how each person in the mix, whether it's a formal relationship, a financial relationship, or just the community, his trusted confidants, the larger community, how it made his skill set and his work better. And then you can kind of talk arguably about the other end of it, which is more the marketing side of it, that when you involve people, it's not just, I've created something awesome, love it world. It's not that sort of, us versus them thing. It's, wow, I'm creating, I'm learning, we're talking about it. Good things happen, bad things happen. And it seems like, well, that's sort of the artist's life. That's sort of the life that a lot of people would hope to have. So for me, when I think about the role of agents or editors or cover designers, I see a thriving world for them. It's just a matter of how that's structured, I think, which is really how that's changing right now.
Oh, I totally agree with you. And, as someone who pretty much does everything myself at the moment, I mean, it really is quite out of control in a way. And, I'm rapidly getting to the point with all my spreadsheets with this, that, and the other, that it's like, it would be nice to have someone else. But I think that one of the issues, of course, is finding the right people. And that's, that's not something that's easy. But anyway, I want to get back to platform because you focus very much on helping authors grow their platform. And I think that the word platform is actually probably kind of overused these days. It's become this sort of almost tired concept. I mean, in all the best ways, I guess, but there is some fatigue around it. So is platform still important? Do you use a different word now? What is it? I suppose, why don't you define what you mean and what's still important about it?
Yeah, so for me, when I talk about the word platform, on my personal level, I define that word as two things, which is the ability to communicate effectively with the people you hope to reach and engendering trust in that process. So to me, that's platform. I agree the word is become or becoming grossly overused, and I think that happens because they say, here's a platform. A key element of that platform is Twitter.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to really focus on you getting more Twitter followers because you get more Twitter followers, blah, 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 blah. And then we're like, well, this sucks because, now I'm spending all my time getting Twitter followers, but there's a disconnect in there because it's sort of like if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, that sort of thing where something went awry there, where we're just talking about Twitter or just talking about Goodreads or just talking about this or that. And we're forgetting about the fact that this is about connecting with readers. It's about engendering trust in that process. So on a very personal level, yes, I definitely still use the word platform, but I've started talking more about, well, what is the thing we're trying to do here? So a lot of the newer things I'm rolling out are very much about, putting the word readers involved there. But how are we connecting with readers? Because that's what the whole platform does for us. So we can still use that word, but let's not pretend that that word is something I'm selling you. The goal is to reach a reader, to have an effect on the world. So let's just, get right to that.
No, I agree with you. And I think trust is really important as well. And I think authenticity as well. To me, it just becomes more and more important in a world where there's just too much kind of going on. People need curators as well, don't they? What you often do is curate information about platform.
Well, the trust issue, I think, gets at what a lot of authors fear, which is they fear doing something that will, make them bad people. They don't want to become a marketer. They don't want to do things that make them feel dirty. Where like, oh, I took out all these Facebook ads for my book, and now I feel like a jerk. And when you think about it in terms of communication and trust, I think it allows you to make distinctions between, I'm not going to do that because it doesn't feel right, but I will do this, which is still a new thing for me. I'm still scared of it, but it won't make me feel bad while I do it. And that could be speaking or talking to book clubs or talking to libraries or doing something on Goodreads. And you're always trying to balance that because a lot of authors are being told they can do a million things. It's all new. They don't have the time for it. But then there's these things that are emotionally very challenging for them. And I think you want to address that right up front.
So with all that said, and the focus on readers, do you still have some fundamentals that you think authors need to have in place?
Oh my goodness, yeah. I mean, it's funny. What I often think is that, let's wind back to the discussion on platform, but people jump too quickly. They jump too quickly to, oh my goodness, Goodreads is doing so amazing. I'm gonna get all over Goodreads. I'm gonna start friending people and whatever. And it's sort of like, all right, so tell me about your ideal reader. Oh yeah, I do. It's definitely one. It's this sort of thing where they've not done the research. They've not figured out who their comps are. They haven't forging relationships. They haven't interviewed other authors who are like them. They haven't really gone back and said, let me look at my bio and let me look at bios of other authors I love doing well and let me do comparisons. So they haven't done their homework, so they don't really know who their ideal audience is or where to find them. They don't know how to best position themselves in a way that their audience is used to seeing people and wanting to see you. So you're starting off with a really hazy sense of who you're reaching, really hazy sense of what to say, and you're jumping into Goodreads or jumping into Twitter or jumping into a conference. And it's going to be harder when you do that. And it's also going to feel weirder because you're going to be pressing all the buttons and not knowing why you're pressing all those buttons.
So it's very much about thinking before doing anything.
Definitely. And very much, I think, connecting on a human level. This is not, a reader is not a thing. It's like I go to a lot of conferences, I see a lot of survey data. And I always take it with an enormous grain of salt because it's like, well, now we've taken human beings and made it a thing, which is a chart, And I'm like, I'm always skeptical of that chart because it can't possibly represent the complexity of human nature. And all statistics are that way. 50% of people get divorced. You're like, I bet if we dug into that, we could actually narrow down by socioeconomic, by all these different factors to realize it's not just if any two people are standing next to me, we can understand the factors that go into that. That will give us a much more granular view of things instead of this weird big thing of ebooks are awesome or prices are going down, these vague statements that get headlines, but you can't take action with that. You can't do anything with it. It's just too vague.
Yeah, and I think there's also a need to take a step back. And I've just spent 2 weeks in India and 2 weeks without the internet. And you have a post on your blog about taking time out as well. And one of the things that I really thought about was getting perspective on all this fast moving, like you say, headlines day to day. But actually, the big picture is what ebooks have been big for, 2 years, 3 years, or getting there. The internet's only 15 years old, I think, from the beginning. I mean, the US is a mature market, but nowhere else in the world really is. Are we really just at the beginning of this, and should people just be a bit more patient?
Well, patience in general is, I mean, that goes back to the 10,000 hour rule type of thing, which, and you and I talked about this last time, I think, when we were just privately, was talking about when each of us started blogging and talking about, oh, what other bloggers started then that are still around, where a lot of people just stopped. Maybe they stopped because they're now doing something else that's better. But this is what you see is you find more success when you do a lot of things, but you do them over time. And if you're going to judge, work with a lot of authors. A lot of authors will get right on Facebook, and then nothing happens, and they're like, "This is so stupid. I knew I didn't like Facebook, and now I know why." And you're like, "It's been a week, like, come on."
And I've sold no books,
Right.
No, I agree. I think that's true. So really, in terms of fundamental. Is it more of an attitude? Is platform an attitude to getting to know your readers, getting to know technologies? Because technologies change all the time, don't they?
Yeah, which is why I try to focus a lot more on relationships, because I feel like, look, talk to any, survey 50 people that ask them how they got their job. And even though the last time I used a job board for a job was 1999, and I'm sure Monster and all of them have gotten dramatically better, in the end, most people get their jobs somehow through a network. And LinkedIn is trying to kind of play into that, all that they are. But in the end, it comes through people more often than not. And I don't care what technology does in the future, that ability to navigate interpersonal relationships, no matter what happens, whether they become Borgs or not, that will still matter. That will still be the best skill set that you can have, is knowing how to talk to people and communicate, and doing so in a way that's trusting. So that's almost why, for me, sometimes I don't get in the weeds as to all the new changes in publishing about, oh, this new Kindle Fire launch, this is how it's changed. It's interesting to me, but I feel like, okay, and I'll be talking about something else in 6 months. I want to focus on things that are going to always, not be like, wow, that's so 2009. It's like...
Yeah, I know what you mean. And although we should point out that when we talk about relationships, we also do, like, the fact is you and I met on Twitter first, and a number of the other bloggers we know, Joel Friedlander and people, who have been around a while, we met on Twitter first, and then we took the relationship into, meeting on Skype, and then you and I have met in person, but I've still never met Joel, thebookdesigner.com, after this many years, 5 years now, which is crazy, right? I
don't think he's a real person.
No, he's not real. But I know you're real. But yeah, so I think people can also, I do think, especially like when I was in India, I was amazed at the fact there are twice as many English speakers in India as there are in England. And that's a big market.
Oh, yeah.
That's like 120 million English speakers who are educated and book readers in India, who I hadn't even really considered as potential readers, and they love religious fiction. So I'm like, yes, I want to get to know that people in that market. That's kind of a new
Is this
thing.
how you're writing off that trip as a business expense?
Unfortunately not, but the next one to India. Invite me to India, people. Yeah, so I think, but the relationships now can be global, can't they, across borders with technology.
Yeah, I mean, where are you right now?
Yeah, London.
I mean, that's the crazy thing about it. This is, I mean, for me, where, so much of what I do, I think, is focused on education. And for me, a lot of what I do is online. There are online classes, online conference, all of that stuff. And what I like about it is I love the global nature of it. One, because I learn from that. So even in courses I teach for partners like Media Bistro, Writer's Digest, it's always astounding that we have people from all over the world in a small 10 or 20 person class. I'm like, this is awesome. Like, we're just, and it becomes human very quickly. The classes always go the same. We make the same relationships. There's no barriers to that. But I also think that it addresses the deeper issue that a lot of writers face, which is maybe you're not in India, but you're in Indiana, and you have 3 kids, and you've got a spare hour a day, and you don't have a lot of money, and your husband's working all the time. It's like you can't you're not accessible to New York or a lot of things. You can go online, though, and talk to Joanna or Joel, or take a course, or listen to a webinar, or listen to a podcast. To me, on a very human level, that is so... It's opened up a whole new potential for people who have dreams and otherwise cannot take the action because of where they live, or the money that they have, or how others define them, because you do it almost personally, you and a laptop. There's not everyone else kind of saying, like, oh, you enrolled in community college, oh, you're paying money for that, you're going, where it's this public thing you're doing.
Mm.
And you scale that by the world, which is your point. I think it's astounding the potential that's out there now.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I know you're not going to Frankfurt, right? Because you're moving house. but Frankfurt Book Fair, which is the biggest book fair in the world, if people don't know, in Germany, they're focusing on self-publishing this year, and the German ebook market, is about to kind of take off, I think, and I think so much of the time we forget and we get kind of bogged down in just our area or whatever, but I'm so excited about how I guess the point about the global thing is the market for your book. It used to be that you had to get a traditional publisher to buy into your book probably in your country, in your area, right? But now your audience might be somewhere else. It may be that with my theological thrillers that India is a better market for me than England. You know what I mean?
But I think something important is going on here too, which is you're an entrepreneur and you're a business person, because it's part of what you're doing here. There's the art and the creative side and this business side. So everyone's saying, oh, here's the big new thing. And you're looking globally and you're saying, what's the kind of blue ocean? What's something no one's talking about? It's a big opportunity. And that's a huge one because it's inclusive of other people. I remember, was it 2 digital book worlds ago? So almost 2 years ago, Bella Andre was in a session, and she was talking about the translations that she's having done with her books. And it was funny because it wasn't just that back then she was aggressively working on translations. She had established a process and teams to do this. So she's one person, and she had multiple people working on whatever her process is to identify markets, get them translated, get them edited, get covers done, get them in that market, move on to the next one. And that was 2 years ago. And, it's such by the time this really does become a bigger trend that, you're hitting, I think, earlier than a lot of other people. Someone like that was already working aggressively. 2 years ago, she was aggressively working on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then she'll be some, big, like, boom, she just hit it. And you're like, no, she's been working her butt off for years on this. And you're just noticing it now because the New York Times wrote an article about it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And so I think that our message to people is kind of to put in the time long term and, don't get bogged down in your daily Amazon rankings. I hardly look anymore. But what I know you kind of mentioned we don't want to jump on the latest faddy thing, but what I do want to talk about is the fact that Amazon and Goodreads, obviously Amazon bought Goodreads this year, and they're bringing the social into the devices now. With the Paperwhite and the Fire, we'll have Goodreads integration, and people will actually be able to, rank within the Kindle. And as a Kindle and a Goodreads user, I'm really excited. What do you see as this kind of social embedding within the Kindle, and what are your recommendations around that for authors?
It's such a compelling thing because for years we talked about social reading, and it hasn't really hit the radar in a really big way. And this is clearly going to be the enormous tipping point for a dramatic amount of work other people are doing. So I think there's a lot of practical levels where people are going to try to game this like they try to game Amazon and Goodreads already. So there will be very clear kind of marketing strategies of what can and can't be done there. I think it's incredible to think about the opportunity to not be, it's like Amazon in general. You can't ignore the elephant in the room. Might not like them, but this is where you have to be. So you've got to understand how it works. Goodreads is not just you and Amazon. It's you and other people, notably readers and writers. So I think it's actually more interesting in that way. But what's interesting to me, too, is how will that change reading? How will that change how we find new books? Because it's all right there, and it's like it's scanning as it's happening. It's all becoming integrated. The downside that I'm always concerned about in general is this is someone else's platform, as in technology platform. And I'm always concerned about going too all in on one thing that you don't own. I think this is going to become, to your point, huge in ways that maybe Amazon and Goodreads hasn't quite figured out yet. But it's also the other end of not wanting to also go all in where you've not developed anything on your own, any personal connection with readers. Because it's pretty, you sort of know this, where if you sell a book on your own site, you have that person's name and email address. You can reach out to them with updates, even good things, not spamming them. You don't get that from Amazon.
Hmm.
And of course they wouldn't give that to you, and they're going to control that, guard that with their lives, and that creates a dependency. And if this is a business for you, you just have to manage that risk. It's not you shouldn't take the risk. You've got to manage the risk, because one little change on there, and your whole career could take a dramatic shift that you weren't expecting.
Oh, absolutely. And, I think it's really great to have, the different paths. And that, again, back on India, I was just surprised that our guide, an educated Indian who loves books, had never heard of Amazon. And that blew my mind, because I mean, the way they discover books is completely different. Now, Amazon's got an Indian store now, but that doesn't matter. They've barely started in that industry. But with something like Goodreads, I mean, again, this is also US focused. I mean, the fire won't even be out in the UK with Goodreads, surprise. Although I've got a Paperwhite coming, so I'm excited about that. But the discoverability within that engine, I think, as a reader, is what I'm increasingly using anyway. They have a really brilliant thing around bookshelves. So my recommendation to people is, you can't. I don't think you can go onto Goodreads and build a following overnight. It's just impossible. But what you can do is get your book on there and do some print giveaways, because that will actually get your book on people's to read shelf. And in that way, you might be able to start getting into the ecosystem and the new algorithms, of which no doubt we'll hear lots about.
4% better than the old algorithm. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it's interesting. I mean, have you really seen this shift? I mean, there's a lot of talk at publishing conferences now. A shift from into data, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more talk about data. I think there's a lot of confusion about it, for a lot of reasons. I think sometimes data over promises and oversimplifies. What I like about the idea of data is you're doing research and you're getting feedback and you're acting on that feedback, getting more data / research, acting on it. To me, that's the process of data that's valuable, not the actual numbers of data that's valuable. I mean, I've seen so many presentations, and whether anywhere in business, but even in publishing, and it never gives you a clear answer. It often asks better questions. Data gives you back better questions, and you take action on those better questions. You get back even better questions to ask, and it's a process of honing. But it's a constant process. If you stop, it all stops becoming useful.
No, absolutely. And the other thing, you go to a lot of the conferences in the US. You're very in touch with US kind of publishing. I read an article recently about, I think it was Romance Writers America, when one of the big name author, Barbara Freethy, was running a sort of side thing on self-publishing, which became a place where agents and publishers were actually pitching authors. Now, I was like, really? I mean, does that signal the change in the stigma, or is that because the romance lot are making so much money?
There's no stigma I mean, you can find an echelon in New York City, I'm sure, where there's a laughable stigma. But in general, if you're someone who is able to craft a story that people have indicated to the world that they want to read, and then whatever that number is, whether it's 1 million people or 1,000 people, that's what's valuable. That's what it is. So I'm not saying that the traditional model is broken or will go away. I don't think it will. But I don't think there's a stigma anymore, because in the end, we'll take the famous example from the last, 18 months, Hugh Howey, which is sort of, he's become this poster child for it. But in the end, he's writing stories that are well written and interesting, and people are reading them and passing them along. And that's what it is. What's a stigma about that? So that's gone. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, and from what I'm seeing with other people.
Well, that's interesting, because I think that is in the US. I mean, in the UK, I think there still is a stigma, very much, and there's still a very, I use the word snobby, literary industry. And interestingly, like, I'm speaking at The Guardian this weekend, and I got some questions in advance, and one of the questions was, will people despise me for self-publishing? And my heart's breaking. I mean, it really is. It's like, seriously, people worry about being despised for doing this?
I mean, part of that I think comes down to human cultural things, which is, I don't know the difference culturally between Britain and the US for that, but even the human level, where I know a lot of people who are married to people they met with online dating.
Mm.
They don't quite go around yelling about it in the same way that they yell about stories where they met otherwise. So here's something that is incredibly effective at something that's maybe the most important thing in your entire life. You know, so many happy couples I know, but there's still a little bit of a thing where there's no stigma to it, but they're a little sheepish about it. It's not the story they want. What they want to tell is a story where it's like Natalie Portman's discovery. I went to a pizza place at age 9 and got discovered, and now I'm Natalie Portman. You know, it's sort of this magical, effervescent thing. It's such a cool story. That's not the same as saying, like, I kept applying and applying and applying, and finally some algorithm got me a job, and now I'm Natalie Portman. You know, it's not the same kind of romantic thing.
Yeah. Oh, I want to be Natalie Portman now. And I did meet my husband online, so there you go.
I swear, most people I know who are my closest friends or relatives is exactly how it is. And it's like, why isn't this talked about more? This is the most incredible thing ever.
Yeah, no, good idea. Good point. Yeah, so well, that's cool. And what excites me about that, and the fact that you categorically say there is no stigma, and and you're so in touch really in the US, and to me that signal, you wouldn't have said that probably a year ago, definitely not 2 years ago. I mean, just so it's changed, and I think that what happens is that ripples out through the other markets. So I hope that encourages everybody watching to be like, yay, the change is coming.
I think what it does is it sort of, but it just it gives you another option where you'll go to a lot of conferences, they'll have the self-publishing session, and it's like laughable, it's one session, but there's so many other opportunities. So yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, so you have a online conference coming up, which is awesome, called Get Read. I think I might be speaking at that. So tell us a bit about that conference and what authors can learn.
So I thought about for a long time. I want to do an event, an in-person event. And the logistics of that are insane. And like most of what I do, which is online courses, I'm like, let me do it online. This can connect to anyone. I can bring the price down and get really anyone anywhere to speak. So basically what I'm trying to do here is cut away all the BS from all of the talk about what authors need to do. So the people that I'm recruiting here are I really start off trying to get the most jaded people I know in writing and publishing. People not negative jaded, but where they've really been around the bend. They've really experienced this. And I'm trying to represent people who I think are closest to readers, but most often ignored in conferences. So there's a lot of librarians and booksellers on the panel. There's agents. There's people working all deeply inside traditional publishing. There are authors and experts such as yourself. And I really want to give a voice to the people who are really in the trenches working with readers and working with writers at the very day-to-day level. So for me, what I'm viewing this as is not the sort of 101 level. This is Goodreads, and here's an amazing story to inspire you to look at Goodreads. And I think there's a lot of value in that, but I want to talk to people who are working at Goodreads or heavily using Goodreads and saying, this is how you've got to really think about it. Here's the illusions that we're going to dismiss. Here's the best advice I can give you to really get some power out of it, and where you should set your expectations. And I think a lot of that is the other thing. So we're doing a session with some booksellers on author events. A big part of that is saying, this is what most authors think that an author event is, and here's a few examples of why that is completely incorrect. And after doing hundreds of these events, here are my 5 tips of how you want to approach a store or event space, and here's what you can expect from it.
Well, that sounds really like that particular one. For example, I'm interested in myself. I mean, there's events in person for authors are just so few and far between, and yet they're definitely effective when you do them. It's just how effective can it be? So it's great that you're talking about some things that are offline as well as online as such.
Absolutely. Again, because to me comes down to the human relationship. So if you're not honoring that, then you're ignoring a lot of how we all come in contact with books in everyday life. But also this is, we'll always have that regardless of what device we're holding at the given moment.
So that's fantastic. And so how, what is an online conference if people don't know, how do they attend?
So essentially when you sign up, it's a live event. It's on November 13th and 14th. And basically, it's an all-day event. So you sign into a private site. And what you're seeing is a video of myself and all the speakers presenting sessions just as you would at a live in-person conference. So throughout the day. So we'll have an agenda, all the topics for day 1 and day 2. It's generally from 9 to 5 Eastern time. And you're able to interact with speakers and ask questions with myself, with other attendees via a text chat on the right sidebar. And then anything you miss, so whether you have to miss one session because your kid is crying, because you can only attend half day, because you can't really be there live at all, you'll then get access to all of the video recordings, so you can kind of go back to sessions you want to hear again, or view the entire thing because you missed it entirely because life is busy.
Fantastic. And where can people find all the information about that?
So it's wegrowmedia.com is my site, and if the direct link is wegrowmedia.com/conference. But on the homepage, you'll see a big banner you can click through. You'll see a video about it, details about all the speakers, the agenda, what we're hoping to do, and why we're doing it.
Oh, no, it sounds absolutely brilliant. Well, thanks ever so much for your time, Dan. That was great.
Thank you, Joanna. I appreciate it.